Thanks everyone and welcome. Maybe I can get my panel to come up and find a pew. That'd be good. Might try and do introductions as people walk on stage for something different. How about that? So Khaled, you're first up. Khaled Sabsabi, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe a little bit of a round of applause. He's a bit of a legend. So an artist with years of experience in community engagement who's known for working across art mediums, geographical borders and cultures to create immersive and engaging art experiences. Kylie, next up, why not? Kylie Legge, ladies and gentlemen, from Placescore.
I might go furthest one.
Either way. So Kylie's an architect by training and a leading professional in the evolving discipline of what we're calling placemaking, which, as I'll come to you shortly, is all the rage at the moment, I believe, as judged by this program and many others around the city at this time. Next, if I could ask Anne to join us. Anne Loxley, on home turf here, Museum of Contemporary Art, C3 West Senior Curator, works with communities, local communities, businesses and arts partners across Western Sydney to address social issues and open up new conversations. And then last, and this is a very special welcome to Linda Kennedy and Gaimea, baby Gaimea in arms. How privileged are we? How privileged are we? This is a real privilege to have you both here. So many of you all know Linda, who's the founder of Future Black, a design studio in Newland Country that advocates for a shift in design thinking to place value on black thinking and values in the first instance and prioritise country and community in all design projects in the built environment. We'll get into the panel shortly, but also I'd like to thank Arnie Dorner for that warm welcome. Thank you. And I'd like to also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and especially in context of what we're going to discuss emerging. I'm going to kick off. I'm going to give you a bit of a view on how this is going to roll out. So I'm going to say a few words which hopefully sort of strike a chord and bring us to a common point. And then we'll hear from a couple of the panellists specifically before getting into a general discussion. And I guess what occurs to me is this ambition for talks like this or meetings like this to end up with action in some way, which should sound obvious, but is not always the case. And so I'm going to be trying to make notes as we go about things that people can do in their everyday life, in their organisations, as voters, as activists, or whatever it is, to shift in a direction that we think we want to go, if we can work out what that is. So in the last month, I've been involved in 4 different panel discussions or speaking opportunities in very different environments, but all around the same theme, diversity. I think this is trending right now as well. Like, as a brown male of non-Indigenous background, I've eventually been recognised as someone that may be invited to speak on matters. And I mean that quite genuinely. Like, oftentimes I'll get knocked back from panels because I don't hit the gender quotient, and I'll say, it's wonderful that you have a very balanced gender balance, but the colour shade seems to be all the same. And so these different viewpoints are really important. And I find myself being asked to get involved in diversity. And here's the thing, in a business context, we're beginning to understand that there are other benefits, other than being just simply the right thing to do, but there are positive economic benefits for organisations who are diverse. This is a new area of thought. You're not ticking a box anymore. There is increasing evidence that if you are after making money, diversity can help you make money. Again, not necessarily why we should do it, but it is becoming part of the debate. As chair of the Nighttime Industries Association, I can tell you with some authority that some of the challenges we're seeing in Sydney right now are a function of lack of diversity of thinking. Our nighttime regulatory environment is still based on a historical reality of Anglo-Saxon drinking customs, and we have a regulatory environment that has been built primarily to deal with that, while we have changing demographics in the city. And so part of the solution is to open up that discussion, have more diverse thinking, a greater diversity of nighttime offer, and we'll reawaken Sydney. In the hotel sector, there is a marked shift to create a greater spectrum of product offering that reflects a diversity of customer base. So when I look at all of these many discussions, I've also worked out one other thing. Diversity is really easy to talk about, very hard to implement. And I think, and that's within my sphere of reference, and I, example, run a business of 30 odd people, and I've worked hard to try and create a truly diverse and inclusive organisation. But then when I start thinking about the built environment, I just don't know, it's starting to do my head in. Like it's because the thing is with the built environment, once you build it, it's kind of there for, a while. Like, and I don't know, like it just, as an example, it's like, we don't have diverse cuisine. No worries, let's bring in 5 different, suddenly we've got diversity in food. But when it comes to the built environment, I think we're talking about things, the scale of the challenge is large. And so what I'm thinking is that this is going to be a great discussion, because perhaps during the course of it, we'll hear from our panellists about how we can make meaningful impact and ensure, as this panel provocation evokes, a diversity of outcome. So, that by way of opening. As I said, I'd really like to see if we can come up with some practical things that we can all do. At least when I look at night time and the challenges that we face there, it's increasingly obvious to me that it's not just solely a regulation issue. It's not solely an issue that industry needs to address. It's something that we as a society need to do all together, and I think that that's how I'd like to kick off this panel, with that thought. So, my ambition today is to try and tease out as many practical things that we can do to collectively make an impact. And by way of segue, I'd like to introduce Khaled Sabsabi. One man who's been making a positive impact on communities for over 30 years is Khaled. Khaled, it'd be great if you could explain in your own words your artistic practice and what motivates you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Is that fine with the audio? The glasses, yeah? Okay. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, and offer my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Good afternoon and welcome all. And it's an honour to be here in front of you all, and I would like to also acknowledge the wealth of knowledge, expertise and skills that are in this room that have contributed to decades of placemaking and best practice, whatever that may mean, in terms of social and cultural development. Today I'd like to share a few personal thoughts and opinions through a very brief insight into my work history and my opinions, as I feel the personal is what shapes and determines who and what we are, which in turn determines how we engage with and affect broader society and community. What is there is just visual candy. It's meant to distract you from what I'm speaking, so yeah. I began my creative life in the late 80s, as most of you know, as a socially engaged hip-hop artist, and since then have evolved my creative practice and processes, producing and collaborating on hundreds of community cultural development projects. Hundreds. CCD, community partnerships, whatever, however it's evolved and been rebranded. As well as participated and presented in over 80 solo and group exhibitions as a visual artist, both in Australia and abroad. I'm an artist and a cultural practitioner, and I stress who hopefully and respectfully draws on the stories and experiences of communities and people around me to inform what and how I do and where I do. As I regard art and cultural thought, actions and making as a true reflection on social negotiations and social well-being. A constant movement towards expanding our limits, perceptions, abilities to contribute to a more open and just world. So the question is, how do we ensure there is diversity of voices in placemaking and in local character today? I think before we try to answer this question, we all of us, individually and collectively, need to think about responsibility, accountability, and a deep commitment to the other and alternative voices, and to raise awareness of the often unappreciated and cultural worth of cultural expression, community expression, and creative freedoms, and the role they have played and continue to play for thousands of years in our ever evolving and developing societies. Having made these statements, I would be naive and somewhat arrogant not to acknowledge, which I've already acknowledged, the wealth in this room, but within broader context, as to not to reinvent the wheel, the outstanding efforts of thousands of people across decades of years of community and social cultural activism and progress made in this country. Of course, there are formats and formulas that keep evolving and changing, which I actually haven't in here, and I would have liked to speak to, and to assure community well-being and to apply community, social well-being factors to achieve those. And they include acknowledgement, recognition, inclusiveness, participation, involvement, buy-in at all levels, etc. All the buzzwords that we've been hearing for decades. But I won't bore you with those. Maybe we can, they'll come up later in the panel discussion. And I do enjoy a discussion between all of us here, and that's why we're here. I think this is one way to move forward. So I will stop now and look forward to the other panels, presentations, and also discussions with you later. Thank you.
So what Khaled was starting to talk about is some of the engagement, the principles for community cultural engagement, and I think that there's been a change of nomenclature around some of these words, community engagement, cultural development, but I think we have a sense of what we're talking about. Who's familiar with the Women in Fairfield project that C3 West did? A few people? Yeah. So I think the temptation here is not to present this as a case study, but it's a relatively recent project that I think is relevant to this discussion because it brought together a number of communities from different backgrounds in a geographical place. And so what would be good is if we can just run a short video that Anne's provided and just absorb it, and then we're going to sort of run through some questions with Anne about the principles that we used to try and shape the project, and then challenges that may have been incurred, all with a viewpoint to seeing if we're going to draw some common themes that will help with the discussion.
So feel free, please enjoy meeting the women of Fairfield.
Assyrian weddings are huge, spectacular events, and Assyrians have the biggest weddings in Fairfield, basically, and I wanted to find out why that was the case. I've made a 2-channel video installation called All Wedding Wishes, and it's about an Assyrian bride, first-generation Assyrian Australian bride called Naren Georges, and the preparations that she undertook for her wedding and the actual wedding day itself. I really wanted people to feel like they were part of a wedding without actually sort of being at the wedding. So I organised a procession of Assyrian wedding musicians, so a dola player and a zorna player, a flute and a drummer, and a group of dancers to lead the audience to the space where the video installation is playing, just so that they can feel the vibrancy of the culture and the music. I didn't feel that the video was able to sort of transmit that in the same way as the live moment, so I decided to have the procession as a lead-in.
The piece I've made for women of Fairfield is called In the Round, and it involves soundtracks I've made with 3 groups of women who live in and around the area of Fairfield. They're being pumped out of cars as they do laps around the neighbourhood at dusk. And I've been working with women from the Khmer community, women from the Aboriginal community, women from the Iraqi community. There's been a great response from the women, and that's been something that's shaped the way the final work has taken form.
Is a work that I've been producing with the Spanish-speaking community choir, as well as Azahares de Slaza, a dancing group, and South American Flavors, which is here in the food court. With the women, I sort of had fairly informal discussions about what their experiences were of living in Fairfield when they came here, and I developed the design based on those conversations. As well, I worked with a young woman called Michelle, and we developed a series of video works together, which are on display in the TVs around the food court. It was very fulfilling. It meant a lot to me to work with them.
Performance piece that is essentially about encouraging women to feel strong, and with a focus on women from the local area. My collective Hissy Fit works with Maria Tran, who is an amazing martial arts star, and she grew up in Fairfield, so we collaborated with her to make this work tonight. We just wanted to work with, I guess, a kind of urban environment. A lot of the parkour DMC kids that live in this area rehearse in the car park, and so it just seemed like a kind of natural place to go.
Great, so Anne, I'm going to sort of come to you to tell us a little bit more about this particular project, but from what I've observed, it involved a number of artists across different communities, different genres, and that part of Sydney is, I guess, there's a number of different communities that you're able to engage. So I guess, like, sort of kick us off, like, what was your, what you're trying to, maybe in your own words, explain the agenda behind a project like that, what you were trying to achieve, and what process did you go through, and where did you think you landed, and what challenges came your way as you embarked on that?
Okay. The first thing to say is C3 West is a program where we put together contemporary artists with commercial entities and communities. That sounds scary. The way we frame it up is we, C3 West, make a co-investing partnership with a non-arts organisation, and we agree an issue that we ask our artists to work on, and we also agree community, and we understand community is a very complex word. So in this case, we were partnered with STARTS, the wonderful organisation for the survivors of torture and treatment. I've got the acronym all wrong, but it's really important organisation, government health organisation for survivors of torture and trauma. And they've got a big office in Fairfield, and also with the wonderful local arts organisation in Fairfield, Powerhouse Youth Theatre. And in that part of Cabra, which is not like the other side of the train station, Cabra, which is it's very visibly Vietnamese. And you've got wonderful big, like Chinatown Vietnamese, Viet Town, like wonderful gates and such. But on this side, on the side of Cabra where we were engaged, there's a whole bunch of different cultures, various Middle Eastern cultures, predominantly in the shops. And there's a really visible, remarkable, notable absence of women in the street. There's a notable absence of women in the cafes. So what we were doing was wanting to navigate the public spaces of that part of Fairfield, consciously kind of feminising them. What can we not put women in these streets? And what does that mean? That was our agenda. It was to address that kind of lack of comfort and ease that women feel occupying those public spaces. And so that was basically the brief that we set for our artists, and we decided on the form of a twilight art walk. And the reason why we did that, we did a project with Angelica Masiti, a name I'm sure many of you know because she's representing Australia at what Liz Ann calls the Contemporary Art Olympics. That's the Venice Biennale right now. And Angelica worked with Sea Free West and Hurstville City Council in 2011, and we worked out, because Hurstville's got amazing food, Chinese food, and it was a really good model to have a night art walk in the urban centre, because there was this wonderful kickback. Not only did all these people who didn't know that great food got to eat that great food. One night I had 2 dinners, but also was really good for the local businesses. And that's, as you know, amazing cuisine in. Oh, you don't think so? Amazing cuisine in Fairfield. And so we made that model, and we worked with 4 different artists, and we crafted it very carefully so that we reached out to a whole range of communities. And it was really, particularly the Zoe Scolio one, the car one, was really interesting in terms of women and the space, because basically the Guntawang Aboriginal ladies who are based in Liverpool and the Khmer women and the Iranian women, they all decked out their cars and they were literally hooning the streets. And it was a really marvellous flip of what you usually with hoons, So it was very successful over 2 nights. We didn't have as many numbers as we did in Hurstville, and regrettably, we all think that word women scared a few people away, because it was easily as good as Angelica's, and the food offer is amazing. But we still had good numbers. We won awards and such, and I think these projects are hard. In the arts, I can see so many fine colleagues in the room. We all bite off more than we can chew. We probably should have worked on 3 artist projects rather than 4, because it would have fitted our resources better, but we couldn't cut when we had such amazing artists. What pains me when I think about placemaking is, it's much easier to do something in Fairfield than it is to do in the city of Sydney, and that's partly because, I hate to say this, but I think the authorities don't care as much, which gives you freedom in some ways. It also makes it hard. The hardest thing I did for that project, that I want to talk about anyway, was securing the use of that central food court in the Fairfield Chase shopping centre. It's such a great shopping centre with super amazing food. And Claudia, who is of course the artist whose artwork is decorating this building for Vivid, so if you think back to the motifs of her sawdust carpet and think about what you're seeing on this building at night, there's some very obvious links. It was just so perfect for us to put Claudia's sawdust carpet in that food court, because not only was it a circle in a circle, there was at least 2 Spanish-speaking food operations there. Anyway, my many polite emails went unanswered, so then I just went rogue and turned up in the real estate agent's office, and she really didn't like me. But we came to we had to pay money to use it, but it was a wonderful outcome. So there's some of the things. And what did you say?
Well, I guess it's trying to identify what challenges you countered in bringing a project like that together?
Well, we had a good process.
Yeah.
We're working with the Powerhouse Youth Theatre. They're very great at community engagement. Like if Kaz was here, what Kaz describes her work as what was it, uncolonised? Something. It's not. I don't know if it's anyway, she's very aware of colonising, and she tries to do the opposite in working with the different communities. And she has a very conversation-based practice. So it was a very iterative and slow practice and a process, and a lot of to and fro with the communities. And I think that's one of the key things. And I think what I'd like to say about what pains me about the public domain, and your question, it's so hard to get diversity in the public domain, especially in the big end of town where everything costs a fortune. But I think what you can take away from this a lot is process. Really deep listening, and back to your point about diversity and the insults around quotas and women's on boards goes all the way to diversity. I mean, we had a conference, C3 West, in 2015 because we believe that there's a form of artist, the artist who works in socially engaged practice, obviously only the good ones, but really they should be running a lot of powerful things. If Liz Ann was
what's
here,
an example?
at least boards. Like there's countries where artists have been prime ministers. There's plenty of towns where artists are mayors. And I don't mean so things are prettier. What I mean is a good artist, and Linda is by. She calls herself a designer, but I call her an artist. Khaled is equally. People like these guys are fearless thinkers. When we get artists to do community engagement, the number of times the answers that the insights that the artists bring about a particular community, nobody's had the audacity to ask the question, because all the artists care about really is their version of truth, and it's about how they see things, and they see things with such fierce independence and creativity, and they care about people. So I'm sure there's other disciplines, or maybe there's other disciplines that have this capacity. I don't know. I'm a contemporary art curator.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, I think, later in the panel. But I'm sort of seeing an opportunity to bring Linda into the discussion because you are talking about the role of an artist or an architect, maybe in community engagement because of, I guess, whatever you want to call it, insight, empathy, independence, the ability to sort of challenge.
They're not in somebody's pocket.
Convention, and so I think Linda, and particularly around, and we were having this conversation before the panel. So I was trying to explain this term that I'd heard, which is Indigenous placemaking, and in my own head, it's one of those, can I ask this question? I'm gonna. We're talking about diversity and inclusion, and in the context of your presence here today, and the founding of Future Black, which, as I understand it through internet stalking, was partly in not necessarily frustration, but in response maybe to being in a structure or a paradigm that you couldn't happily fit, I guess, maybe if I can use it that way. So prompted to start and found an Indigenous design practice, maybe. Why? And why do that? And then secondly, what level of priority when it comes to big thinking, open hit here, should we be looking to people like you as, I guess, few leaders, I suppose, in Indigenous thinking around placemaking? Best way I can ask it.
Good one.
By people like us, I think you mean by Aboriginal people. Is that what you mean? Or I'm going to take a step back while we're there. First, thanks to Annie Donna for welcoming us onto country. This is really awesome here today because I can see at least 3 Aboriginal people in the room. So many times I get asked to speak at things or go to things, and there's no blackfellas there. So one of the things that motivates me... You know why she's crying and why she started to wriggle then? When I heard that it started to get close to me, my heart starts racing a bit faster, because no matter how much public speaking you do, you still get a bit nervous when you're up on stage, and she can feel it, which is beautiful.
I wasn't carrying by me when I was asking you that question. It would have been screams.
Little cutie. But just to have Aboriginal people in a discussion talking about the built environment is a huge shift from when I first started doing this work. So thanks for the people who are here. Auntie Rhoda, I can see you there, and Jazzy, who will be our baby holder soon. So I'm a Yuin woman. That's my main cultural background that I connect with on the South Coast, just the next nation to the south, from the south side of Sydney, there, Georges River, down to the Victorian border. Saltwater peoples, connecting there right along the ocean, bounded by the mountainside, the escarpment on the west. So being here is also a special but lovely thing, being just one nation up. A lot of my other work happens, I guess, in the Sydney area, not just in Wollongong. Living regionally and doing the work that I do is, you know, you're never going to have consistent work, I guess. Starting up, and thanks for sharing what you have in Khaled as well, because I think it frames the discussion a little bit easier rather than chucking me at the front when I start saying things along the lines of like, why aren't we talking about being on stolen land when we're talking about making place? We don't need to make place, there's already country here. Why aren't we talking about country? Why aren't we talking about how we can draw out aspects of country and community and the work that we do, rather than how we experience public place? Placemaking always is framed around public place, but our places are also where we spend most of our time in our residences, in our homes. So how do we start to draw these conversations about like, what is community? A family is a community. It's not just this kind of the complex idea of what community is. Why I started Future Black, part of it, yeah, definitely out of frustration, but I was hitting too many roadblocks trying to do it mainstream, trying to work for other people or work through institutions. I've worked in and out of universities over the last 10 years, and the same within architecture practice, working in private practice and local government, and consistently hitting roadblocks to things that are not things that I would see that should be a roadblock. Like just being able to be like, cool, have you talked to traditional owners? Or we don't have the funding to do that. We don't have the money to do that. It's like, well, that's not really, like, to me, that's not a valid response, that we don't have the money to do it. Like, this is just a small response that they're saying, like, just pay the rent for this one thing, just go and talk to them. I'm not even saying you need to take in their perspectives on your design. Just go and have a yarn, go and let them know you're doing what you're doing. The trigger point for me when I chose to actually get it off the ground was working at Melbourne City Council at the time, the Queen Victoria Market Renewal Project, which is still happening. I've been drawn in as a graduate. I might just bump off to Auntie Jazz. Thanks, sis. Working under the City Design and Projects team within council. If anyone here's worked for a big council or done work within councils, I'm sure we all know of the complexities working within that kind of system. Underneath the Queen Victoria Market precinct area, I'm not sure how many of you are aware, there's actually a cemetery, the first general cemetery in Victoria since colonisation. Just outside of the boundary wall to the cemetery were Aboriginal burials, because we wouldn't be included in the mainstream burials area in a cemetery since colonisation. So obviously I feel like it's obvious, maybe not so obvious. My response is your engagement for this project needs to go beyond just the traditional owners of this area, because there are blackfellas who were brought here from right across the state, right across the nation in terms of displacement, who need to be engaged from where their ancestors have been buried. Bringing that conversation into a local government just went, let's do everything we can to get her out of here. Like, this is too disruptive to our processes. We've got a tower we want to get up on Terry Street, and she's stopping it from happening. I left there pretty quickly.
And I don't want to break your flow, but it's this concept that of it being a validation exercise versus, I think, genuine wanting to get to the answer. Is that like a fair way of answering it, in the sense that...
Yeah, it's ticking the box. I don't think it's just blackfellas that get the box ticked in a lot of these projects. But like the same as the gender yarn that we had earlier, like make sure we've got 50% women on the panel, make sure we've got a brown person, whether they're Aboriginal or not, doesn't really matter. And the same way that our acknowledgements get chucked in at the beginning of a presentation, this is also unusual to have a welcome to country for an event like this. So many things that we go to, it'll be an acknowledgement, just checking the box. We do our acknowledgement. These are where the toilets are. This is the emergency exit, and it just gets swept into everything else. But jumping back to that, starting up with Future Black came out of being able to there's so many walls that I'm hitting. How do I just shed this frustration, which is also making me really unhappy in life, and just get this stuff done. So going out and doing it yourself is the independence that I guess you spoke about, Anne, to get shit done. But I guess that frustration stems back to like being able to acknowledge in any of our work, like things are going to continue happening the same way unless we acknowledge some really difficult truths within this country, which I think most blackfellas can acknowledge, but non-Aboriginal people can't, don't, won't. It's too hard to do. But like everybody working here on any kind of placemaking or any kind of design in the built environment is working on stolen land, no matter where you are in the country. Like that has to be at the foreground of any of our thinking before we start doing anything, which means that blood has been shed on that land. Somebody's land has been taken off them. People have been moved from place to place. Like so many of our buildings are on our sacred places, on our burial sites. It's not just this romantic idea of Aboriginal people have been here for thousands of years and we lived harmoniously in this land. Like we're here now and we still are not included in the Constitution. Like that's not removed from when we start to talk about designing built environment. The built environment is 100% tied to the land. How do we start to have these conversations? And also acknowledging that all of this built environment, whether that's designed from architecture, the urban design, these have been used as tools to assimilate Aboriginal people. Like that simple, what seems like a simple context of putting us on missions and into housing has forced us from living in our cultural way, in our traditional way, which we have done for over 60,000 years, into a space that the colony decided is how we should live, which doesn't work for us. But I would also argue that it doesn't work for anyone. It's not the idea of the nuclear household is, as much forcing what I would see an unnatural community to be so small and confined and exclusive, rather than us actually having that community care. And the built environment informs that. Yeah,
correct, yeah. And that's, from my little ivory tower, when you look at issues like just sustainability and, particularly in the context of this nation, there's other drivers that are entering the population or the consumer mindset, which are starting to ask questions, and then so things like the nuclear house and that type of living, for other reasons, like leaving aside for the moment the Indigenous, the historical reality, are prompting these debates, which is why I think you're starting to see more and more this concept of placemaking. Anyone seen that new film 2040? Which is by the guy who made that sugar film? No, anyway, it's a view on the world in 2040 through the eyes of his four-year-old daughter. Sort of, which when you think about that from a future of civilization perspective and the planet heating up, you can't help but start asking these questions, which to me has always been an opportunity to for big thinking. Now is the time for big thinking, and I think that's why this is a popular area. I want to come to you, Kylie, because I think that that if we follow the narrative of this discussion, we've heard from artists who are doing work that is built, and Khaled's background is extensive. We didn't go into it in terms of, I guess, just working with community over a period of time on the streets. And in other environments with a well-being mindset for communities, so informing Khaled's art. And then we've sort of had a brief look at women in Fairfield, and the ambition being to sort of look at the multiplicity of diversity at some level, I think, gender issues, race issues, and we didn't really go into age and other things, no doubt. But while all that is, I guess, good thinking, there's the sort of practical reality that right now in my hometown just outside Liverpool, like tractors are ripping up previous farmlands which would have been previous Indigenous lands, and we're building huge residential estates that are driven by, I would argue, largely economic principles over community. And but there's just that reality, and so Kylie, I want to ask you a few questions about placemaking and some of the observations you'd have on that process around community engagement, and maybe feel free to give people a bit of an overview of the process. I think that in large scale built environment projects, the different stakeholders might go through. and then see how it meshes with that. I'll come back and keep asking you questions.
Yeah, because I could have a conversation with each of you, I think, about
we'll get to
what
that.
you're
And by the way,
talking
we're doing Q&A, so think about questions.
Okay, good questions. So my background's, I did my undergraduate in architecture and then I did my postgraduate in planning because of the fact that architecture was too small and it felt too elite and very selfish, actually, kind of like so. And my early architectural had been around this idea of how buildings impacted humans at a very, very personal level. So I'd written my undergraduate thesis on materials and the history and symbolism of materials, and so I was always really invested in this relationship between how humans interacted with their environments. And it's really interesting hearing these really personal stories, because I think now as a professional placemaker that I don't get the opportunity to really dig deep into the individual story, that my job in a way is being the expert generalist about all of the people in the community and representing all of them in a way. And my dream is, my vision is to make urban environments better for human beings, right? That's my company's vision, that's what every team is onboarded on. Anything that doesn't do that isn't something that we say yes to, we say no, which leads to this. I mean, the first response in terms of independence is because I own my businesses, I've been able to say no, and it's also led me to not do a number of projects that I don't feel align with that personal vision and the company's vision. In terms of a process, and I guess even that's been interesting. So when I started Place Partners 11 years ago, I had a real battle on my hands to define placemaking. Everyone was like, oh, you don't have to define it, everyone's a placemaker. And I was like, well, if I'm getting paid for it, then yes, I need to define it, because you need to tell me at the end whether or not I've achieved what I set out to do. So we defined it, and it's now actually the definition used by many organisations, as the collaborative process of creating, enhancing or managing people-focused places that respect the context of that specific location, which I think connects to a lot of the things that people have been talking about, because there's social aspects, there's cultural, environmental and economic. So it's a systems approach to the making of cities. That being said, it's also, I think, one of the hardest things to do. Like, it's literally going like the guy, William White, who's kind of the grandfather of placemaking, right, said placemaking isn't rocket science, it's harder. And, every single team that I bring on, when I say, okay, first you've got to, we spend 70% of our budgets in research in my organisation, just to try and understand what the hell is going on, like what this place is, what it has been, but also what it wants to be, and what all the things are. And then we try and put that together to try and say, okay, what does that mean? Like, what does this place want to do? And part of that, which is really important, is the community engagement. I've also got to say, like 10 years ago, I'd be in a room like this and I'd say, who's heard of placemaking? And not a single person would put their hand up, or maybe one person. Like, it's really, really new, and it's got massive really, really quickly. And there's been a shift from, I think, community development. I met with 2 councils in Melbourne yesterday who are taking on placemaking as an approach. And they had the community and development teams and the economic development teams. And the economic development teams are running the show and going, oh, so Kylie, we want to know about placemaking and how we can do it, and da-da-da-da. And the community development teams are at the back, and I'm like, well, you guys know what this is? And they're like, yeah, we were doing this, forever ago, working with communities. The difference is that it's very outcome oriented now, and the outcome is generally fiscal. So the value proposition with working with communities is around reinvesting in places of exchange, and that place of exchange is often focused on financial exchange, so it's main streets and town centres. I don't mind that, because going in those places where we come together, amazing things happen, right? That's where we can build a sense of belonging. That's where you can, hopefully feel safe, feel connected, exchange information, learn about other people. And so if we didn't have those places in our cities, we'd be actually in a lot of trouble. which I'm sure isn't answering your question, which was really long. Because I'm going, where am I at in terms of the answers, or should we just start opening up? Because I want to talk, like, Fairfield. I worked in Fairfield, so I know, like, 75% of the public domain is men. It's not like something you imagine. Like, we did the counts. It, like, literally is that. And then in terms of working with Aboriginal peoples, it's actually one of the most challenging things that I've ever attempted, and really, I feel probably one of the most things I was least successful at. Like, there's all these things going, like, it's really, I'm really interested in that conversation in a way.
Yeah, well, we can have those. So I guess where I was, like, hope, and I think you've given us a sense of it, is that there's, in your professional experience, a process that you do via research, I think, to try to get to a sense, like, and I suppose it's not necessarily a discussion about research methodologies or so, but, like, I guess maybe is one of the takeaways that it doesn't give you a perfect outcome.
It's almost impossible to get every voice in a community. Well, it is actually impossible. The closest we get is with the census, and that data is very demographically oriented. The work that we're concentrating on now is building the largest social research data set for cities. Most engagement is either consultative in terms of that it's actually asking for feedback, so quite conflict oriented. What we're trying to do is capture values and be able to segment that by gender, by age, by geography, by background, even certain by economics, by household size, by a whole lot of different things, to try and be able to unpack communities prior to projects even starting, to actually understand what's important here now and who are also the people that might likely move into this area and what can we learn about them, because they're really hard to tackle as well. Like, going a lot of the west, the people who are moving into those suburbs don't live there, right? Yeah. There's a tree. And so there's been no solution to that. So at the moment, most engagement is self-selecting. It's incredibly...
And by that, just self-selecting, it means people volunteering to do it.
Yeah. So, I don't know, hands up, how many people have gone to a council engagement? And you guys are like the active ones, right? Like, you're actually interested in this. I myself have only been to like 3, I think, ever that were to do with my community, where I wasn't involved as on the project team. We do a lot of our stuff face to face. We send out multilingual surveyors and things out into the field, and 99.6% of the people we speak to have never engaged with government. And there's lots of reasons why. Like, it can be scary for some people. Like, it's legitimately, government kills people in some sort of backgrounds. Some people don't feel that they have the expertise. So if you're doing a consultation saying, please come to a workshop about the council strategic plan, there's probably, again, a huge amount of people just go, I don't have anything to offer for that. Like, what would I be able to do? So they self-select out. And so what you get is the same voices over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah. I think I've heard them all.
Not painting a vision of hope around this one, though, are we? Because, like, what it's saying really is that it's going to, if the inputs to that process are flawed, then the outputs are going to be flawed, and then therefore the placemaking at the end of it is going to be...
Yeah. And this issue of time and money becomes really present. I was just reading something today about the Highline people in New York who created this amazing community project, and it had all of these unintended consequences in terms of gentrification and pushing out populations. And they're creating like a toolkit or resource for other places and communities to help them to manage that change in a healthier way that's more equitable for everybody. But this stuff is new. Like, people didn't know that. The Highline guys went into that thinking they were just making this amazing community thing, and they didn't know that land values were going to go up 600%, or something ridiculous.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to throw an open question out there. What about, like, just I don't know, it's hard because you're looking at, like, densely populated areas in cities, suburban towns, regions. They're kind of like, if you accept that way of analysing it, there's 3 different scenarios there. And then the balance between placemaking that's driven by economic outcomes versus community outcomes. You're saying that there's both these concepts are at play, yeah? Are we in agreement with that? Yep. Like the balance, say, in, I don't know, central CBD between economic outcome and community outcome, what would you put it at?
What, a Barangaroo as an example? Or?
Maybe.
That's a good example.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a topical one. I think we should talk about it.
Well, like, is it placemaking if the core for the outcome is economic, or is that like money making? It's if the primary outcome is about consumerism or access for people who already have money to make more, then I wouldn't call that placemaking.
I think I've been on the edge of that project and I haven't worked on it, but going that it's definitely, when you're looking at a precinct development like that and the return on investment is focused on money. The financial investment, not the reinvestment in the city, it's really hard to say, oh no, we legitimately want to create a space where all people could go, because it's not designed for that. And so the place
programmed as well.
Yeah, the placemaking becomes place branding, and it's still people oriented, but it's oriented towards people who fit within a certain audience category and who are customers. So it's customer focused rather than community focused.
Is there examples that, so the provocation is about how do you ensure like diversity of voice in placemaking and local character. Are there any examples that the panel's familiar with which are good expressions of this? We presented women in Fairfield as an artistic work as opposed to something that's been done from a built environment perspective.
Yeah, temporary projects are much easier than built. You get permissions easier because nobody's saying, oh, that thing's going to be here for 30 years. Like you were saying, thing gets built. I've been going to Dubbo a lot for the last 2 years because my mum's in a dementia facility there, and I was really excited the last time I went because my friend Kirsty Mitchell, her great-grandfather Bill Ferguson, there was been a sculpture unveiled to him, and I got there and it was, in all my years of growing up in Western New South Wales, I haven't seen a public domain event for Aboriginal people in the main street, and it was just, I just again just felt so ashamed, but so excited, and it was so upsetting listening to Kirsty and her family. That man was a legend and a gentleman, and look him up later. The things that he did. But there he was, like in a planning sense, he was in the right spot. Like he was giving a speech where he used to give speeches about rights for Aboriginal people. Right there in the spot in the city centre where the rotunda is, and just down the road was the hall where he gave his last speech before he got sick. I was going, this is incredible. Like, am I got to get proud for Dubbo Council? But of course, no, it was the community that did it. The Aboriginal community have been, going on for years, for like decades, and got a GoFundMe, and then I think the state government came in at the end, and it's a really beautiful bronze sculpture. And as a curator of contemporary art, I'm supposed to not love bronze sculptures, but it was by a bloke, a local sculptor. Everything about it was perfect and amazing, and it had nothing to do with regulatory authorities. It had only everything to do with the resilience and the rightness of what the Aboriginal community were on about.
It's a challenge. I'm just going to jump in there. It's a challenging one too. I haven't actually spoken about this in a public space before, so I'll chuck it out there. It's also based on colonial values, though. The idea of memorialising something in a permanent material in a place that has a direct relation to a historic moment that, in terms of how long Aboriginal people have been here, is just a blip in time, is absolutely not our way. Yet we, as Aboriginal people, have also been kind of duped by the colonial concepts of what value should be placed on, to think we really want a sculpture that's been how many hundreds of thousands get spent on it, when there's still no real outcome for community and still no change within the broader built environment other than a statue. Like, we've got so many, when we talk about how much money gets put into placemaking, like when you go into any community for blackfellas, if you went and asked them there, what are your community needs? Most of the time the responses are going to be things around, housing is one of the key ones there, health, education, not, do I feel like that mall has a, understanding of what my family's history is here? And how do we then start to have these conversations, engaging people, but also to broaden people's, I guess, expectation or ideas of what could happen here. Like, we often have non-Aboriginal people coming to us and saying, we think this is a great idea for your community. And we've had so little for so long that we just say, that's a great idea. You're going to give us something, rather than actually critiquing what that thing is, to say, is that what we need? Is that what we want? How could those resources be better allocated to actually benefit us, rather than kind of what we've been told is a good outcome?
Linda, can we... maybe Khaled, jump in, yeah.
Thank you, Linda. I think there's some confusion in the room about what is placemaking. I'm definitely confused. And hands up if you feel confused about what is placemaking. Now, seriously, be genuine about it. What is placemaking? To whom is placemaking? Right? What is the worth of placemaking to a community or to a geographical area post the post-making strategy or initiative has concluded? Because we know the community will evolve, the site will evolve, will change. Do we plan placemaking? Do we consider placemaking in the short term, medium term, or long term? Do we consider it over, it's a 1 year strategy? Do we consider it as a 5 year? Do we consider it as a 30-year strategy? These are the questions that I think really important, but I'm also confused about what is placemaking and to whom placemaking, the meaning, what does it mean to the different trades or industries, pending their motivations and their drives and their goals and their objectives. So can we have a conversation about this?
Sure, like why don't we...
Thank you about, I think, giving clear determination about the reality that we are all working on stolen land. It doesn't matter what industry, what ethnicity, what history, that is the actual fact. Personally, if I may add, that I don't know how to resolve this. It's not I don't want to, but I don't. And I think a lot of people in this room probably feel the same way as well. But I don't want to speak on their behalf.
No, I think I'd identify with that, that last part of what you said. So I'm going to try and hang on to that bit there, but let's go back to what you were just talking about a second ago, Kylie, with what is placemaking. Maybe you could have kicked off with that, but maybe it does mean things to different people, maybe, it would seem.
I've worked in community cultural development, many people in this room for 30 years, and I'm still, each format and each model is different to the previous and will be for the next. So there is no format, there is no formula. There are guidelines, of course, but you cannot determine a format and impose a formula that will succeed and be able to be replicated.
Can I say something? I think that's a fantastic question, and I think it makes me want to ask the question: who usually pays for placemaking? Like, for whom is it a thing?
I don't know.
Developers?
Yeah. Well, what are
the people usually responsible for place, so going fundamentally local government, are asset managers of most of our shared environments. So and then there's state government agencies that might be responsible for some components of it, and then also federal government in terms of Crown land. More and more we're seeing the private sector take ownership for a variety of reasons of parts of the city, either because government doesn't have the desire or capacity to be able to deliver significant new parts of the city to the community, and the government doesn't necessarily want actually responsibility for that. So a lot of the work that we...
But that's the full spectrum of the commissioners.
Look, we've worked directly with some communities, and usually that's as a facilitation role.
But they're not paying, the communities aren't paying.
Sometimes it might be like a community of businesses or different people associated with running or maintaining a park or sort of some other common space.
So just if I,
Yeah,
Michael,
please.
may ask one more question, because what we're trying to talk about is diversity, isn't it, in placemaking? So given that spectrum of commissioners that you have worked for, who do you think is most genuinely, interested in a kind of, a respectful and serious representation of diversity?
Definitely government. Anyone who has a financial interest in a return is going to be looking at a much more market-oriented approach to placemaking. So what they're trying to do is to understand who the people are that are going to be living there and to create the best environment for those people in order to attract them, right?
And sell them stuff.
Yeah. And for them to actually, I think it has changed. I think I have never worked for speculative developers, like people who just sell stuff. So, and that's kind of been one of my things, like if it's just like, we're just building this and then we're selling it all off and we're leaving, because there's no true investment in community for that. So the people that I've tended to work with are those who have got long-term, quite projects of scale where they have to build community as part of the whole proposition, because otherwise the people themselves are going to be like, I'm miserable, I don't like it here, right? So
but usually that only still benefits existing privileged parts of communities. Like we wouldn't see at the moment, like Redfern's a hotspot because it's being developed for other economic benefits that are not going back to the existing challenges we have with their housing for Aboriginal people in that area, that the placemaking things that go there is still around an economic benefit for people who aren't the ones who we're saying we've got a challenge here when it comes specifically to housing. So those processes, like if it's going back to a government who gets to decide or guide who's being engaged, and it's not just blackfellas who are still missing out, but we're still missing out.
Yeah. And you can only do it, again, as independent. So I've chosen not to work on any of those projects because I don't believe, firstly, I have the expertise, but I also don't believe in the premise of it, which is that, if you go in and there's no opportunity for the community to actually have to be able to guide the process, or there's no return on investment for their time and energy in it, then it's a project that I won't do, because I don't think that's truly placemaking. There has to be a sense of ownership, and the participation in that process isn't in feeding back whether or not we should have 3 glasses, because I've already decided there's glasses, right? It's like it's the whole thing about, should there be a stage? Should there, I'm back out there kind of going, I don't know what this is going to be like. How do you want to create this environment? But only if I've got remit from the people who have owned the asset to do that. So if I come into a room and they're like, I just want you to get them to organise those 3 glasses, then I'd be telling that community who were invited to participate that that's the only thing you have a chance to do it. You can now choose to come in or not choose to participate in that. Because I don't want to, that's the way I approach it.
When you speak about the continued engagement from a developer, are you talking about they're going to continue putting funds into that built environment? Is that what that means?
There's usually, because there's a long program, but so probably the one that may be most interesting to all of us is going that I worked with Landcorp, who's a state government agency in West Australia, and the Broome North project, and so we were engaged for 5 years, and from day one it was about building capacity in that community for us to no longer be needed. So every project had to go through a sieve of going what could potentially become self-sustaining, and how do we actually build that, so as much as possible using local organisations to deliver any programs on site, about building on-site ownership. So a local group now runs the community garden that we have. We had a book share that was one of the first things about, I guess, changing the nature of ownership as well, because it's actually quite a diverse community. Lots of different art projects, sporting exercises to try and get them to co-create grants programs that didn't need to be auspiced groups, so that individuals could apply for it, and that was a massive thing, just changing the governance around getting money from government. It's, as I said, it's really hard, and you wanted a great case study, but it's actually, I don't know if there's a perfect one, and I like to think that we try and do our best, but I wouldn't go, we're amazing. Some things have been really great, and other things haven't.
I think I'm after case studies, not because I expect there to be a perfect outcome, because if there was, we probably wouldn't be sitting here trying to work it out.
Really great outcome that Anne's worked on a project with Jenny Bissett here with the C3 West Blacktown.
Should we talk about that? Yeah,
Native Institution project. Do you want to give the context of the project?
Oh, wouldn't you like to?
Or Jenny could. So the Blacktown Native Institution in Western Sydney, if you don't know about it, the first thing you should Google when you leave here is the Blacktown Native Institution. It's the second institution within New South Wales that Governor Macquarie was taking Aboriginal children away from their families to be taught how to be white effectively. The Maria Locks families, that's probably the most well-known Aboriginal family name associated with that place. But the site that the Native Institution building was on in Western Sydney had been a farm for years as well, and then acquired by state government, who could not do anything with the land because there's Aboriginal cultural heritage on that site. So financially, economically, it's of no value to government. It's a liability because they still have to maintain the land through a process that I don't know the full details of.
It was unwieldy, and it was a massive collaboration. Our wonderful colleague Jenny Bissett sitting at the back of the room with her hand on her intelligent chin.
Put your hand up so we know where you are.
So we were, as Blacktown Arts, in partnership with C3 West, Blacktown Arts, of course, working with Blacktown Council, and we had the museum and as many different sectors of the Aboriginal community that we could reach, because we had wonderful advisors like Linda and Lily Shearer and Kathy Craigie, and we did two big, massive community artistic collaboration projects in 2014, 15, and then 17, 18. But this was work that Jenny and her amazing team and the artists and community had done earlier work. So it was very peculiar because Landcom was also part of our partner, one of our partners, and we set our stated aim was obviously to honour the stories of the people associated with the site and to make general public raise awareness of it, but also to support future permanent Aboriginal custodianship of the site. And the Landcom people were very good, and so as the council people, and they worked with the Darug, the traditional owners, and there were. By October last year, I think it was a little bit earlier, there was the Darug Strategic Management Group formed. And then in October, the Landcom handed over that land.
Can we just say that again? Landcom handed the land back through a community engagement process involving the arts. That's the win. Like, that's a solid project. Mm-hmm. The title got handed back to the traditional owners. So when we talk about what's a good outcome, like, that's a good outcome. No matter where you're working or what field you work in. Like, if you're working on a project with a team of different collaborators, and whether it's 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 30 years, the title is handed back to community. Why we know it can happen. We've seen it happen with the Blacktown Native Institution project. When I was engaged in that project through the MCA in 2014, the discussions then were about a building. What building can we put here? It was about building place, making a new place. It was about this idea of how do you put a structure here, because a structure means success. A structure means we've given something to the Aboriginal community because they've got a building. And then we get caught up in that thinking, well, we don't have a building, we don't have a space, give us a building. When, like, most cases where this happens and councils will give space to Aboriginal people, there's no negotiation of title. Like, a good example of that now is the post office in Redfern. Like, whoop-de-doo, you've got a committee together and you're going to open it up as a cultural centre. Give the title back. Hand the title over. If this is a meaningful project, hand the land back. Like, it's not rocket science. It's a discussion that needs to be had. It's up to us within our own communities to have those discussions about where it's held, where that title is held. A lot of us would be advocating for processes beyond Torrens title systems. But in the meantime, what can we do in the now? Every single one of you who owns their house here.
Oh, with the bank.
Well, if the title is in your name, who here has Torrens title in their name? I think there's a few more than that would be in here. But, like, you can hand back your land. A lot of you are like laughing at that. It's not something that doesn't happen. We saw examples of it 2 months ago in Tasmania, a farming family down there who had handed back the title and then created their own, I guess, treaty process so that them on their, what was their private property, their native title, could hand that back respectfully to the traditional owners and have an access use agreement with the traditional owners of that area. Like, it can happen. There's examples of it happening. It's up to every single one of us to enact it. There's no reason why we can't.
Do you think one of the challenges is actually the complete lack of knowledge? Like, that's amazing. And if I had known about that, and there's projects where we've been on land where there has been active Aboriginal communities and not known how to engage with them, because that's probably the only thing that would be of interest, is to start the conversation going, oh, okay, this is your land. How do we actually make it meaningful to you, and to invest your time in wanting to even talk to us about it? But and just because it's, like, when we were talking on the phone, I have, through lots of different avenues, met lots of Aboriginal people, but I reckon my mother, who's from Europe, has never spoken to an Aboriginal person ever in 40 years or 50 years of living in Australia. And a lot of the people I know don't. So how do we find out more so that we can do better?
I think part of that load goes back to the individual, just in the same way if I want to find out more about another culture or another person, it's up to me to put the work into doing my own research before going and, I guess, expecting someone, especially within Aboriginal communities with our history here of extensive amounts of trauma that Aboriginal people today are still living with and managing, yet we still come and put the face on and sit on the panel to get information out there. Every single one of us is suffering, but we have had so much loss in our families and our communities that I think we've lost so much that it's kind of like, what can we lose anymore? We need to actually build relationships to be able to move forward. And it's not about the reconciliation moving forward. It's about the genuinely building one-on-one relationships to get better outcomes, not just for me and my families and my kids and what goes on from there, but for non-Aboriginal people as well. Because non-Aboriginal people in this country carried, not as, I wouldn't say in a comparative way, but carried trauma too. Look at the shit your ancestors have done. There's a hell of a lot of really heavy stuff there that I'm glad I don't have to associate with, because it's a lot to break down and to actually accept that, oh, maybe my great whatever it was who owned that farm did shoot an Aboriginal family there, and I do have blood on my family's hands. That's something that's very challenging to come to. But also for people who have come to Australia since those points of invasion, is to be able to say, okay, I might be, from whatever nation it is that you identify with, but now have more benefits on this land than what traditional owners do. And better access to education, or better access to health than what a lot of blackfellas do. They're really challenging, I guess, context and traumas to confront. Building relationships, I'd say, is a very, 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 very start in saying, I don't know any Aboriginal people, and a lot of people come to, not just me, the other blackfellas that are here to say, oh, you're the first Aboriginal person that I've met, or whatever it is. I'm sure it's not. They just haven't looked like what you want them to look like. But outside of that, build your relationships. If you don't know where to start, go to your community centres, go to the services, go to engage Aboriginal-owned businesses to get whatever it is that you need. You need catering done? Google Aboriginal catering businesses in Sydney. Choose for your organisation or what you do to actually engage more blackfellas in your processes. If you work for an organisation that has a board, look at your board's diversity. Bring an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person onto your board. Pay them for their time. If you want to keep blackfellas engaged in what you're doing, what's the return benefit, particularly for time? It's not about paying people off to say yes. It's actually acknowledging that, this is time. That, Auntie Donna, how many welcomes have you been to in the last month? And it's a little bit different in the CBD because it's more economic, I guess. There's more money in the city than there is, say, somewhere like in Wollongong, where a lot of organisations expect people in my family as well to go and give their time to tick the cultural box and have nothing to return back. And we're talking about elderly people as well, some of the elders within our community. And being able to look at it, I guess, from a turn of economically return investment, if that's the way your organisation works, so it will change your organisation for the better. It's not all yourself as an individual. It's got to start in here first before it can be put into a reconciliation action plan or be put into a strategy, Indigenous strategy, or yeah.
Khaled, I think that giving it back was maybe the answer to the question that you also asked, wasn't it? Like you said, you don't know how to solve it, and I think maybe the discussion then went into the Blacktown native.
No, Michael. It's not I don't know how to solve it, because I've worked a lot on Aboriginal, working with Aboriginal, collaborating on projects for 30 years. It's not like I'm not an entry, I'm not blind into how to engage. No, my issues are how do you work, how do you exist on stolen land? Okay, and it's not a personal, it's not something that I could answer. It's something that my leaders need to answer. Just to be clear. Okay,
yeah.
So once that's resolved, then we can go forward with that. So please continue with your question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was why I was sort of saying at the beginning, like, if this is a valid session, it's about working out what actions people can take, and without, my head's just trying to keep up, to be honest, with the conversation. But it's, I think Landcom, is that a federal body?
No, Landcom is New South Wales, and Landcorp is
Redfern
in
Council
would
be like state council, like the post office.
No, that's Sydney Council.
City of Sydney,
yeah.
And I'm sure that there'll be a federal example, but the thing about all of us is that we have a right to vote and a right to educate ourselves and engage, as Linda's sort of rightfully challenging us to do. I don't know. One of the things we touched on earlier, which I don't know whether we want to revisit or not, I'll throw it out to the panel, see if they buy it, but is just at scale, like projects at scale where the economic value is high. This is what characterises these areas and that we're sitting in now, I would think. Anyone overly? No? Everyone agrees. And similarly, like large scale inner city urban development where a government entity basically contracts with a private entity to develop a suburb. I'm thinking of the Waterloo, what are they calling it? South Everleigh, I think, development project. Is there? It's hard, I know, but is there an opportunity to, outside of voting, inject that level of big thinking into some of these projects? And if so, how do you do it?
From my side, you have to participate. Like, it's, we can try and do the best engagement, but if people don't actually choose to come and participate, then we don't hear those voices. We have, over the last 2 years, collected sort of place values from 40,000 people, but still it amazes me about, how many people don't, and I don't know if it's because they feel disempowered already, like it's not going to make any difference or whatever, but if we don't actually, in these processes, if you don't turn up or if you don't participate, then you can't have it. And if it's not the right process for you, is also to say, actually, we would prefer you to come. In some cases, especially where places where it's not a traditional sort of engagement process aren't normal, it's our job as the facilitator to find the right places to come, and whether it's turning up at school for, as people are picking up their kids, because that's the half an hour that they have to have conversations, or if it's going to the youth club or whatever, but trying to do that. But if you see someone and they've got a clipboard or whatever, they're legitimately trying to understand, so have some pity on them, and maybe you will get a better outcome if people do hear what you've got to say.
I have some experience, some considerable experience. Actually, I hate to think how long I've been sitting on the City of Sydney Public Art Advisory Panel, and I sometimes work in other advisory capacities in the public domain for the city. And at various times I've been a curator in the public domain, and quite frankly, I despair of mainstream processes. And I think that the mainstream processes need to be, and if it is radicalising, to perhaps have an artist present at more of these decision makings, well then let's call it radical. If it's radical, to have an Aboriginal person of appropriate skill and interest in the room, then I'm all for it, because at South Everleigh, and I say this with a really heavy heart, I'm seeing a development that is it's just going to be canyons of buildings, and there's like little pockets of public domain, and then that poor public domain has to work so hard to tick the boxes, to tell the Aboriginal story, to convey character of amenity and such. But you don't need to be a genius to go, gee, that's just too built up.
Yeah, well then that is an issue of voting, because there is a government that's just been voted again who is absolutely determined to deliver every bit of public land to the private sector. And if they were voted in and there's no placemaker, facilitator or artist who's going to solve the problem of the overdevelopment of these sites. And so we can go out there and to try and empower those people to create some environments within that framework, but the framework is set. Like, we can't change the yield, it is already determined, and it's being determined in cabinet, and so we can't, if you were in there doing it and there was 20 artists, you're not going to make a better outcome. They're still going to deliver 20,000 units or whatever.
Yeah, I think we need different mainstream.
Different.
That's helpful, isn't it?
Different what?
Different mainstream. But what do you mean by that? By different politics?
Yeah, I mean different processes.
It's politics, though. That's not process.
Well, politics are part of it.
I think you go back to what I said earlier as well. Definitions of placemaking, and to whom and what are the motivations. I think we all encapsulate this thing within placemaking, this development, this policy, etc. But what does it mean at that particular time and space? I think that's what needs to be, worked a little bit. We use terminology loosely in today's world. So yeah, go back to that. Thanks.
Placemaking is not a term that I'd even heard until about 3 years
Well,
ago.
yeah, that's it,
And the framework that I'd seen it in was Indigenous placemaking, which I immediately doesn't make any sense to me in my mind. It comes back to some of the work too of Proper Now in Brisbane, that work there around Aboriginal art. It's a white thing, like Aboriginal architecture, it's a white thing. Indigenous placemaking, it's a white thing. It's just, how can we make this more academic, to write about it, to make more money out of it, to sort of, frame a business around it. But is it any different to, just designing places? I don't know. Is that different to, just in the way that we should be doing it? We should be engaging people in the work that we do. Why do we have to add that as a box of something that we need to do? It should be standard practice to build communities, to create better communities. That seems like a...
And those values are clear, and have always been clear. And we have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of models and formulas, not just local, but international as well, to be able to inform better policy and better determination and better vision. Why do we keep reinventing the wheel? In terms of recategorizing something like placemaking, okay, well, we've ticked that. It's no longer community engagement or cultural engagement or cohesion, social cohesion. Let's call it placemaking now. I don't understand. I really don't understand. I'd like to hear from the crowd, actually. It's enough talking from it. Yes.
You lost your job.
Sorry, Michael.
That's all right, Khaled's sharing.
Nearly 4 o'clock.
Well, you're.
Thank you very much for the conversation, and thank you for bringing up that question. It's a really good one. Linda, can I just say, your use of terminology, and by simply saying exactly what many of us think about placemaking, I want to applaud you, because it does take a brave soul to question things. And my question is, do we have a cultural conscience in this country? If we looked at the real value of Aboriginal culture that we talk about, our First Peoples, could it form a future narrative that is our foundation as a country, with all those values that I know you are very aware of. And could it become the new Australian value? And then we could revisit this by ensuring that every single footprint we make on this country is aware that it is stolen. There are people who have great capacity and want to give back or want to assist, and I think the Blacktown is a great analogy to that. So do you think, or can we adjust the cultural conscience in this country?
I think we can, and I think we are. I think it's small, it's little ripples. Like, I don't think I'd be up here with the people that I am if there weren't kind of shifts already happening, compared to even 10 years ago when there were just to put that, statistics out there, there's less than 10 registered Aboriginal architects in the whole country. None of them are women. Like, I'm not registered. It's, the people in decision-making positions when it comes to the built environment, our mob are not represented in those spaces from a technical capacity anyway. We are often brought in not often, sometimes we're brought in as part of the consultation process, but actually when it comes to the decision making, we're not there. I think we can see the shift. I wouldn't do the work that I do if I didn't believe that the changes could happen. It's slow, it's hard work, it's tiring, but I've seen changes in the own work that I do, and that's what gives me that hope. I don't think it's, there's the bigger picture here, like the things that we're talking about that are the real issues there: stolen land, governance, talking about policy. It goes back to an illegitimate government who, are making decisions that they don't have even in international law, a legal right to be doing. So that's a very big issue when we talk about problem solving it. When it comes to what we do in this, in 2019, with the skill sets that we've got, with the governments that we've got, with the way that communities are now, it's up to every individual to start to create those shifts. I worked in a project in a primary school down home which finished up I say finished up. My direct role on that built environment project finished up a year ago, but it's the community there that was my intent to build just by working on an outdoor space within a public school, and it's continued. This is a year on from me stepping away from that place, but that's a cultural shift in a community. It was working on an outdoor learning space, which has a school that has a high Aboriginal population, and the school's so proud of it, and their parents and non-Aboriginal students at the school all love using that space. They were all part of a co-design process, which would probably be seen as placemaking in today's kind of language, but it was just me taking I'm the expert hat off and saying, actually, this is your space. You tell me all the things that you aspire to, and let's make it as much as we can happen with the budget that we've got, things constantly coming back to that budget. But the real outcomes for that were not the space. It wasn't even that it's still being used. It's I was able to build myself and the other Aboriginal people that I worked with, able to build one-on-one relationships through that project. Over 200 local non-Aboriginal people in the Illawarra. So we've just built our allyship for Aboriginal people and Aboriginal advocacy from one small project at a small primary school, so that the next move we have, whether it's to go and say, hey, we want our council to stop celebrating Australia Day, I've now got 200 people that I can go and say, hey, that project that we worked on together, that was really mad that you guys came in with your excavators and showed me those cool things. We've got a conversation happening at council next week. Do you think you could come along? And I've already, through working within the built environment, built a one-on-one relationship, had a chance to have a yarn with whoever it was, about some of the other issues that Aboriginal people face, creating that cultural shift through one-on-one relationships, which can benefit a whole community. But it's beyond the work, what's seen as the work that we do, whether it's a designer, as an artist, that you view me, I'm a Yuin woman, and my goals and my dreams for me and my community and beyond that is for us to have our land back. That knowing that what comes with that is our own community and cultural health, our ability to manage our lands in the way that we want to, that we choose to, in our self-determination, without someone else coming and saying this is what we think is best for you. But that cultural shifts are happening. You're there in your role at the Opera House, a cultural shift when it comes to in your space that you work in comes from having black fellas there. We've got to be present. Long answer.
Zach.
Hi, thanks everybody for all of the things that you've said today. They've been really interesting. However, I feel I work for a local council up in Hornsby, and I feel like there's a question here that says, how do we ensure the diversity of voices in placemaking and local character? And I recognise 100% that that we're on stolen land, and that changes are happening, and they need to happen, and that understanding is going to change the way future generations of Australians see themselves, whether they're Aboriginal or whether they're migrant or whether they're of Anglo-Saxon heritage. But I feel like we've almost gotten lost in the big picture. And what I wanted in coming to this particular event is and I know I'm not looking at a quick fix, but I wanted some ideas about how I can ensure in my job diversity of voices in placemaking. And I was just wondering if, thinking about the small picture, if you guys could give perhaps just one suggestion that we could take home and use.
Yeah, okay. I think placemaking is about social well-being, right, of the community. And that is something we all acknowledge, yes? Yes? Okay. So there is places like Cultural Development Network in Melbourne, which you can access online. There's also a wealth of case studies that are done by Australia Council for the Arts, as well as Old Arts New South Wales, as well as others that have had projects in terms to achieve this, right, well-being, in terms of how to be inclusive, having considered processes, best practices, the outcomes, the milestones that you need to take, the processes that you need to include as many voices within, your project and so on. So there is a wealth of history and how to that is there. You just have to dig for it and find it. I don't think placemaking personally is too far away from community engagement or community cultural development or any of these past evil terminologies that existed, or community partnerships, as we may call it today. So I think that's a really good starting point. And for me, it's always been, when I do these sort of projects, is the idea of understanding your project, why and with whom. Of course, I use the who, how, what, where, and when. And who is this project for? Who is this for? Who will it target? How it will work? Where it will work? All the considerations, all the wealth and structures that are around that. And that information exists everywhere. And it's not an easy fix. And it's not in terms of being a one format fit all. You have to be flexible. Flexibility and the key to listen are crucial in this sort of engagements. So that's my opinion, obviously. So
I think approach is a big part of it. Like, just to be straight, coming out and saying I came to this public event and you haven't answered what I came here for is a very privileged response. Like, take the reflection, look at yourself, think, how could I approach this in a way that's actually going to engage people? And the expectation or the privilege to come in and think someone's going to give me this is not the approach that's going to work when it comes to our Aboriginal community. Like, we get asked for everything all the time to answer everyone's questions for every single thing that comes up in every aspect of how the nation runs. And like, that's the who benefits, who's making the decisions are two key questions that are there. But the approach has to be able to come back. If you want this portion of the community to be part of that process, how are they benefiting from it? Like, what are we actually getting?
In C3 West, I've worked with a lot of different councils, and what strikes me is the different structures of the councils. I know a council's pretty healthy if they've got good Aboriginal good number of Aboriginal staff, if they've got cooks, if they've got community development staff, if they've got cultural staff. And I'm still staggered by, I'm working with some people, try and remain nameless, who don't value culture, we found this working in Blacktown and in other councils, like there's so much wealth of knowledge within the council. For example, those demographers, whatever that department is, the social planning mob, they were very interesting and helpful when we were doing the work around the Tallawong train station, and the environment people. Too often, all of us, we get too siloed, and I think I'm a bit hurt that you said that you hadn't got any takeaways, because my big thing that I started with is really deep listening. And I think if we all listened really like we cared and we wanted to really hear and then maybe do something about what we heard, we'd be going somewhere. And back to a really pragmatic level within the workplace, there's a whole lot of expertise I've found in the one council and the people. We have to do work to get them to talk to each other.
Do we have any other questions that we're burning to ask? I've just over here.
So my name's Megan Phelps. I live and work on Darrick land at Epping and Westmead. I don't come from an arts background at all. Can you draw any placemaking lessons from excellent places that developed spontaneously and organically, current or historic, local or international, and included diversity, whether that's crossroads, train stations, places of worship? Because we hear a lot in our discussion today about the constraints, the policies, the processes, and I just wondered if there are lessons from the organic and the spontaneous and good places.
The case study I always show is a little public space in Coburg, in the north of Melbourne, and it was actually my first project, and I was very aware that there was this big plan to change this community, and that there was this assumption that it had to change, I guess, was the thing that I was really aware of, and was trying to actually unpack what that actually would mean to these people and what would be kind of, I guess, the generative code for any instructions we might be able to give to the team about the appropriate way to actually even sort of tackle that as a project. I'd had the privilege of listening to a professor out of New York University called Setha Low, who had written this book called now I won't remember it here, but I'll tell you afterwards. She had been talking about the looking into spaces as each of us, from whichever background we are, going, that we have an intuitive understanding. It happens in the limbic brain as whether or not we're welcome in there or if it's safe for us. And so that she had built this practice around the idea of invitation and the cultural and behavioural cues that would say that this is a place for you. Coburg had a very diverse migrant community, many people coming from war-torn countries, and this little place was really thriving, actually from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m, and then after that it was actually really dangerous, but during that time it was amazing. And so we decided to study this place to see what was actually working, and it really actually formulated a lot of my thinking about what it means to be truly open to diversity, like that there was a public library and a post office. It was on the path between the train station and the tram stop, that it had public seating that was shaded, it had private seating associated with commercial enterprises, it had an Arabic nut shop, it had a Vietnamese bakery. So there was probably, for that particular community, when you looked at the demographics, there was things for everyone and they could see them. So there's a movement in city making towards the homogenisation of space to kind of say it's for everybody rather than saying it's for specific people. And when I show the mapping that we did of that place and how the economy worked with the social and the cultural and the physical, and I went, that's how a good place ecosystem kind of works. And whenever I see a place that works now, I remember going like, and I used to fight with the architects because they'd be like, oh, that's the first place we should fix. And I was like, no, that's the rules for this community, right? That's the instructions about how this community wants to work, and that's the generative code. And I use the analogy of like a game of pickup sticks, that a great place has all of these things that are all in relationship, and you start buggering around with it, you pull one out, the whole system could collapse. So you've got to be really, really sensitive. So I don't know, that's my one. And there are lots of those minute places that really work for a particular community. They've kind of co-created.
Anyone else want to have a quick crack at that one? Linda? No?
I think the more we're fleshing it out, I think more around how, at least within my own community, like the placemaking is in the way that we're talking about it in this discussion is actually much bigger at an urban scale around how can I have access to health services, education, food and fresh water, and still be able to go on country and still be able to fulfil the cultural obligations that I have within my family and community. They're things that, have I seen that in a functioning way, at least not within my own knowledge of the coast of New South Wales. I choose even that. In terms of access to services, Sydney is the place where kind of everything is. I would choose to live regionally. That's where my family is. That's where my community is from, even post invasion and colonisation with those shifts. And I think a lot of Aboriginal people are travelling between, CBD for work, economic stability, and home, wherever that might be. I'm not so interested, I guess, in the smaller scale of how has this particular spot worked well.
Before we go, just join me in thanking the panel. Khaled, Sabsabi, Linda Kennedy, and Loxley and Kylie.
Thank you, everyone.